Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. Thank you, all of you, for being here. When I am in a space like this, I am spiritually at home. I have been giving talks in places like this as I was here twice before, correct? Um, and I am feeling, when I'm in such a place, grounded in certain principles that really are at the center, at the heart of all the great religious and spiritual teachings of the world. Universal themes that just have to do with living from the love in our hearts, trying to be better people, trying to live more humbly with a power greater than ourselves, practicing a level of radical goodwill towards other people, and knowing that it's our responsibility to try to make the world around us a reflection of that goodness in our hearts. It's not complicated, is it? That's not to always say it's easy. We all know that. It's not always easy to try to live from love, to own it when we didn't, to atone for our mistakes, to make amends, try to clean it up, to have mercy on ourselves when we fell short, and to have mercy on others when they do. When we try to live that way, it's a full-time job. And notice that it's also not about monitoring how well other people are doing. It's about keeping our eye on ourselves and our own journey through life. Now, I ran for president before, and I'm running for president now, because I believe that those principles apply to the journey of a country as much as they apply to the journey of an individual. Because all that a country is a group of individuals. All that a country is a collection of people. And the same issues apply to how a nation moves through the world as apply to how a person moves through the world. When we at least try to be good people, not that we're going to always make it, but we're going to try, and we see that it's our responsibility to try, and we realize that nothing is more important than that we do, our life works better. And you come to a point where you're not trying to live a better, more ethical, more loving life because you feel you should. You come to that place because you've suffered enough the consequences of not having done so. And so for our country as well, we're not having a conversation about America always getting it right, but we're talking about the fact that, and those of you who are around my age, tell me if I'm wrong. It seems to me I grew up in an America, not where we always got it right, but where there seemed to be a consensus that we were supposed to, that we were supposed to try, that we were supposed to be good, that people were supposed to be treated well. We knew nobody was ignorant of our terrible mistakes then any more than they are now. But it seems to me there was a time when there was more of a sense of public healthy shame. Some of you who are old enough remember the Vietnam War. And during the Vietnam War, there was something called the My Lai Massacre. And it was where these villagers got massacred by Americans. The whole country stood in shame. Appropriate shame, healthy shame. Today, so much has been normalized that is everything we were brought up not to be. Everything that our parents told us, don't you be like that. We still know, well, we'd better try to be good as individuals. But when it comes to our collective behavior, it seems like we have lost any sense of public conversation about the moral good. Now, some people, when they talk about the moral good in the public conversation, are talking about issues of personal morality. And many of us politically feel like, hey, that's not the government's business. But it used to be that there were also issues of public morality. Letting children go hungry in one of the richest countries in the world, that's a moral issue. The fact that 39% of Americans have to skip meals regularly to pay their rent, that's a moral issue. Invading a country that never did anything to you is a moral issue. And yet what has happened is that we don't go deep. We don't go deep collectively anymore. We go deep personally, and we go deep talking about our own issues. I mean, I think, excuse me here, guys, for a moment, I'm sorry. There are people in this room, we could take any two of you who had never even met before and say, okay, you're going to go out for coffee when we leave here. And I would be willing to bet that within 45 minutes, it's absolutely clear which of you, if or both of you, goes to therapy, what toxic relationships might be very difficult in your life at the moment, what boundaries you absolutely have to set. And that's kind of what I like about the Americans. We get very real, very fast, very upfront, very direct, and in your face. That's an upside of the American character, in my mind. But when it comes to our collective conversations, we've been trained. Keep it shallow now. Keep it stupid now. Farm out your best thinking. Farm it out to, you know, those people, those experts, because they know what they're doing. So if you have anything like, wow, that feels crazy to me, but it's almost like, well, it must just be me. I remember reading an article about myself, my career years ago, that I feel applies as much to what I'm doing now. In this article, it said, Marianne Williamson isn't saying anything everybody isn't saying. She's just saying it when the mic is on. I feel this campaign is saying what everybody's saying, but which we're sort of supposed to believe, well, maybe it's just me who thinks that that sounds like, really? Like, are you sure we're supposed to do that? You know, it's not Nevada. Where is the Senator Gabby Gifford's husband? That's Arizona. I heard him tell a story once, because of course, as we all know, he was an astronaut. And he was asked to be on a committee that was investigating that horrible Challenger disaster. And if you remember, those of you who are old enough remember that there was a problem with the O-rings. Do you remember? And he was telling the story about how when they did the study, you know, what they did, you know, in the aftermath, finding out what happened, they found that all these people in lower level positions at NASA were thinking, isn't that like not good with the O-rings? But the people above them were not mentioning it, right? And so they all thought, well, I guess that was just me, and it must just be me. They must know what they're doing. So I'm going to repeat that. They must know what they're doing led to disaster. Now, the reason the senator told the story was that when his wife was shot, and we all remember that, he was called, ran to the hospital, they took him to the hospital, and he met with the greatest brain surgeons. There was a bullet, and they had to figure out what to do. And he was the one who had to make the decision. We can go this way or we can go that way. And there were all these medical students in the room. And he said, I had learned, and I said to the medical students, what would you do? He said, I didn't want to hear from the people who had been doing it for years. I had heard what they had to say, but I wanted to know, what would someone with a fresh eye have to say? And I feel like we're a little bit in that situation in America today. Something has gotten off center, and the people that we are expecting to course correct are the ones who have been in charge of the divergence from the better angels of our nature to begin with. It's not personal. It's just how systems work. A system has grown up. You know, when I was a little girl, my father used to walk around the house. Beat the system, kids. He used to walk up down the hall. Beat the system, kids. And I said to my brother something like, maybe like 10 years ago, you know, I think Daddy meant that. I think he was serious. And Peter said, damn right he was. Beat the system. What does that mean? Sometimes things are not okay. And in our personal lives, we know that. In our personal lives, sometimes we have to say, this is toxic, I'm not going to be here anymore. In our personal lives, sometimes we have to say, this is wrong, I got to set a boundary. Sometimes in our personal lives, we know, I'm not going to engage with this. Sometimes in our personal lives, we know this person might be nice enough, but this is not cool. This relationship is not cool. I'm going to walk away from this. Do we not do that in our personal lives? So why do we not recognize what a sick relationship we have with a government that takes our tax dollars and then allows carcinogens in our food? That we give our tax dollars to, that then withholds from us Medicare for all, so that 1 in 4 Americans are living with medical debt. 68,000 Americans are dying every year from lack of health care. 18 million Americans cannot afford the prescriptions their doctors give them. 75 to 90 million Americans are underinsured or uninsured. Over 1 million Americans are rationing their insulin for no other reason. No other reason. They'll tell you it's complicated. But that's like, whether it's a man or a woman and they're messing with your head and they're trying to tell you, no, honey, I was staying at the office. I'm telling you, I wasn't with her. And you're saying, but the lipstick on your collar. No, you're not. You're imagining that. At what point, how many more times are they going to tell us that it's complicated when we know better? No, it's not complicated. It's corrupt. That's the only reason. I spoke at an English university several months ago, and I mentioned something about the over 1 million people in the United States who ration their insulin. Now, this was in England, and they have socialized medicine. They looked at me. I saw the look on people's faces, like, what do you mean people ration their insulin? Because in no other advanced democracy or any other advanced country do they lack universal health care. And all those other advanced countries have tuition-free college and tech school. They don't have people unable to afford their prescription medicines. And it's a moderate position in all these other advanced democracies to talk about subsidized childcare, to talk about paid family leave, to talk about guaranteed sick pay, to talk about guaranteed housing, to talk about guaranteed living wage. They have played us. They have played us. It's no different than, I remember when my daughter, this is an amazing story to me. She was 3 years old. Maybe she was 4. But she wasn't older. I think she was 3 because she was little. She was so little that I was so shocked when she said this. Are you ready? I had been dating a man, and I really liked him. And we had broken up. And he had come back over to the house one day. And she was 3 or 4 years old. And he went into her bedroom and was playing with her. And I was thinking, oh, he might be coming back because he's out playing with her. So he had left. She came into my bathroom. I was getting dressed, and I said, well, Emmy, did you and David have a good time? Because I'm trying to get my 3-year-old to give me information, right? Do you have a good time? And this little child, how little kids sometimes, and they'll cup your chin in their hand. And she cupped my chin in her hands, and she went, Mommy, it's not working. I was like, who are you? Isn't that what we do with each other? Honey, it's not working. He's not into you. Your government's not into you. Your government's not into you. Your government's into their donors. Now, there are individuals for whom this is not true. I'm not talking individuals here. I'm talking about the system. I'm not talking about individuals. It's not, this is not, and we need to remember that because our analysis is skewed if we think it's individuals. It's the system. It's just the way things start working. And it's been this way for a long time now, where especially in the last 14 years, although the problem has really been going on for the last 50 years. But in the last 14 years, since the Citizens United Supreme Court case, so much money can flood Washington that in issue after issue, our elected representatives. Now, I want you to sometimes it's not about data, it's about understanding the data. So we all know a phrase like elected representatives. But I want us to take in what that means. We elect them to go represent us. That's the whole thing here. That's the whole thing here. We elect them to represent us, but the contract has changed. The contract has changed to the point where in policy after policy, in leader after leader, their behavior, not just what they tell you. We know they come back every 2 years, every 4 years, like the cheating, spouse. Oh, honey, give me one more time. Right? In their actual behavior. And then you go, you know what? I'm not going to listen to your words. I'm going to listen to your behavior. I'm not going to listen to your words this time. I'm too smart for that. I'm going to look at your behavior. And in issue after issue, their behavior makes it clear. They are not representing us so much as they are representing their donors. Because so much money, there is such undue influence of money on our political system that time after time they do more to represent the short-term financial interests of their donors than they do to represent your safety, your health, and your well-being. And let us not kid ourselves. That means whether or not you have health care, whether or not people are putting GoFundMe pages on the internet for life-saving operations for people that they love. It means whether or not people can afford their insulin. It means whether or not people in their 20s are carrying tens of thousands of dollars of college loan debt when all they were trying to do was self-actualize. Remember? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And governments set up, instituted to secure those rights. We should be setting our young people, the country should be like individuals and it should be run like a family, a fiscally responsible family. You set your children up to win. You don't cut them off at the knees. Making kids have to take out tens of thousands of dollars of college loan debt just to get a higher education, and particularly young people of color who were told that's going to be the way you're going to close the wage gap, get that education. What a sick trick this is, just so some lending companies and higher education companies and government and that unholy economic alliance wake up everybody. They're not into you. It's not working. It's not working. And that's why we're ramping up rather than ramping down fossil fuel extraction. Even though, because we're living at a time now, I think it doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or Republican president, they toe the line with big oil. The main difference on this issue between the Republican presidential candidate and the president we have now is that one says what you want to hear. The other one doesn't even bother. They think they have us. Because they do. We've been played. And that's why there are chemicals in our pesticides that our own kids sometimes are running across the grass in their bare feet. And then only later when they get diagnosed with leukemia are people raising their eyebrows and wondering about all that. It's why our farming sector has been decimated. It's why the carcinogens in our food, the toxins in our air, the PFAS in our water, the fact that we're fighting wars that at this point we don't know when it's a righteous foreign policy and when it has something to only do with making money for defense contractors. And people are spiraling down. People's lives are falling apart because of this. And I'm particularly concerned about young people because those of us who are old enough, we know sometimes you go down and then you come back up. America's young people have never seen the up. They've never seen the up. We've seen it down. Yeah, it goes down, it gets back up. And also because those of us who are old enough trusted our political party to at least try. So at this point, I'm feeling like, no, we've got to disrupt this. This is not going to disrupt itself. The word inertia means the tendency of the object to move in whatever direction it's been moving. And we're moving on decline. And we need to be grown-ups here. It's interesting, going back to how we are as individuals, we're very mature when we have to be. If I were to say to any of you, your child's in trouble, you would get very serious and very mature very fast. If I were to say there's a fire in the house, you would get very mature and very adult very, very fast. But collectively, we're glazing our eyes here. We're allowing ourselves to go numb. And so what's happening now, particularly with young people, people are spiraling down. Now that same energy, when it's just such anger in people and frustration, and people just don't even know what to do, sometimes they throw it out in violence, the dysfunction and the malfunction of violent behavior towards self or others. Others, depending on their temperament, it's the same energy. But instead of going out, it goes in. Depression. Depression, anxiety, sometimes even suicide. The diseases and the deaths of despair. Now this status quo, which has now this government and corporate interests in such unholy alliance, there's a heartlessness to it. Now, once again, going back to when I was young, and I'm glad to see some people who remember, we remember. I think there's an interesting intergenerational thing now. And those of us who are older really need to be the keeper of a story here. We need to allow ourselves to remember, wait, this isn't how it was when I was growing up. Not that it was perfect, not that we're romanticizing, but tell me if I'm not right. Tell me, those of you who are around my age, tell me if I'm not right. Wasn't there a sense that the corporation was supposed to care?
Yes.
Young people today would go, nah. Young people today wouldn't even believe me when I tell them that in the 1970s, the average American couple could afford a house. And the average American couple could afford a car, and the average American couple could afford a yearly vacation. And the average American couple could afford for one parent to stay home if they wanted to help raise the kids, and that couple could send their kids to college. And one salary, the one parent who worked, could support a family of 4. Now, you know what that was called? That was called a thriving middle class. We don't have that now. Young people hear that and they feel that we're talking about some fairy tale or something, because the middle class has collapsed. And it's collapsed because of a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. Now, if this was your personal life, and I was your therapist, I was your counselor, I was your friend, we would talk about that sociopath you've been dating. And we would expect you to have an adult understanding. This person is running games that are not good for you, and you need to get out of this. And you would understand it. Well, that's what's happening for us collectively. A sociopath is someone who has no remorse. They have no regret. They have no sense of moral or ethical responsibility to someone. And we know when you encounter a person like that, you disengage and go away. That you have the power to make that decision. So, starting back in the 80s, some people say it actually started in the 70s. Once again, we don't have to personalize it, we just have to describe it. We bought into this economic paradigm. It was a big PR ruse. It was a big PR ruse. And that somehow we were going to change things and it was going to be really good for everybody. It was called trickle-down economics, remember? And what was going to happen is that instead of the corporation having the responsibility to care about all the stakeholders, that means, yes, the stockholders, yes, the CEO, but also the workers and also the community, also the environment, right? Instead, this theory, which had actually, there's a lot you can read about it, was actually made up by a man named James Buchanan, an economist, whose theory was that in order to protect the primacy of property rights, you had to put democracy in chains. Now, we're going to talk about that primacy of property rights thing, but just put that to the side for a moment. It was the idea that all that the corporation owed was financial responsibility to the stakeholders, to the stockholders. And even if that was at the expense of the other stakeholders. just do everything you can do to make the stockholder value higher, even if that meant that was at the stake of at the expense of the workers, at the expense of the environment, at the expense of the community, and so forth. And the idea that they sold, and they had this really charming, great actor to sell it to us, was it's going to be so good because a few people, yes, they're going to make a lot of money, but it's so great because they're going to be job creators. Remember? They're the job creators. And then, because they're the job creators, all that money is going to trickle down and lift all boats. Well, wake up, everybody. Wake up, wake up. It didn't lift all boats, okay? It kicked millions of people off the boats they were already on. And it left millions of people even in that ocean without a life vest. Because their job model was never job creation. Their job model was their business model was job elimination and worker exploitation and union demonization and slashing tax. Just these huge tax cuts for the very, very richest, so that all this money just went to the top, so that now, instead of a thriving middle class where there's a universality to some extent of opportunity, you have to really have money in this country to know you have easy access to health care. You have to really have money in this country to know you have real access to higher education for yourself or your kids. You really have to have money in this country to even know you have higher access to a place to live. This is not going to get any better. This is now the system. It's now baked into the cake. It's now baked into the cake. And the political party, which is my political party, which traditionally stood unequivocally for the advocacy for the working people of the United States, they do what they can to make it better for people within this unjust system. It's to say to you, you know, I'm really sorry it's so hard. We'll try to give you a little something. So that the Republicans only throw you crumbs, the Democrats throw you cookies. You can't live on cookies either. According to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, you're an American. You have the right to feast. So at this point, it's just like, once again, in our individual lives, we're quite mature about this. None of us are happy that we're mature about it, but we are. People do drugs too much. People drink too much. And sometimes most of us in this room have either received a phone call or even made the phone call where somebody said, did you see her at the party the other night? Did you see her drive away with those kids? Did you see him fall down the stairs? In other words, did you see our friend or our mutual family member who takes drugs too much, who drinks too much, and it's gotten to the point where their friends and loved ones go, we have to do an intervention. We have to do something. And everybody knows what that means. Do you think we need to do something? And when enough of us say, yeah, I think we need to do something, somebody says, I know somebody to call, they do interventions or whatever. Because as a society, we now get that if you abuse the body with drugs or alcohol too much, physical survival is no longer guaranteed. Well, we need to get out of our magical thinking. Because when it comes to our democracy, we're still in that state of somebody will handle it. The people need to stage an intervention. And the people who control and dominate the system that is, as it is, would see anybody who comes from outside that system as dangerous. Oh, that's dangerous. Or unserious. How unserious is this conversation that we're having today? Oh, that's unserious. Kooky. Not even, whatever they need to say. And that system is determined to protect itself. And it's not going to change until the people step in. Now, there's something so extraordinary. You know, as I came up here today, I had the same feeling that I've had every time I have done this. You know, many of you have known me in my career for decades. And when we talk about these things and how lives change and how you endure a crisis and how you transform, which is everything we're talking about here today, there's nothing different. There's nothing different. We're just talking about our collective situation rather than our personal situations. Not very different. I can't break into prayer at the end. You have to do that yourself, you know, because that wouldn't be appropriate and for good reason, and I understand that. And I understand how in America we have a tradition of keeping the conversation politically secular. And I support that and I affirm that because we are many religions, all religions, and no religions. But the values are the same. The principle of let's be loving people are the same. And so the issue at this point is, if we're talking about these things and we're talking about healing our lives, that's important. And if I'm talking about a book, for instance, that I might have written or a class I've taught, that's great. And I'm grateful for that, and I've had a lovely career. But what we're doing today is important for the world. Important for the world. One of the things that I find about Americans, people have an instinctive understanding that this country matters. And it does. I know a woman. She's a very successful documentary filmmaker. She was born in Lebanon and raised in Norway. And she does very, very serious documentaries about, you know, horrible things that go on the planet. I mean, the most serious issues you can imagine. And she told me something one day that has stayed with me. She was in some European conference or capital. She spends a lot of time in other parts of the world. And we had been talking about the fact that many countries in the world are just kind of disgusted with America for various reasons and so forth. She said, yes, that's true, but I want to tell you something. She said, I was at a particular conference or whatever it was, and I asked world leaders that I was talking to, okay, tell me the real scoop. It's the middle of the night and you can't sleep. And you're worried. What scares you the most? And she said that she was very surprised, as was I when I heard her say it, what the common answer was. Because it was among all kinds of people that she wouldn't even expect to hear it from. When she said, what really scares you the most in the middle of the night, what keeps you up, this was the response she got routinely. What if America goes down? Does that make you feel a little responsibility on your shoulders? It should. It should. We are only 1/5 of the world's population that has the right to have the kind of direct influence on our government that we have. But the problem is not that we have been shackled by external chains that bind us. We've been shackled by internal chains, just various ways to manipulate us. And we've been manipulated into this kind of shallow thinking when it comes to world affairs, when it comes to the affairs of the country, to the point where we routinely accept too little, we expect too little, and we limit our political imaginations. Now, when you tell an American, have no political imagination, it doesn't fit with who we are. You know, when you see an airplane, a huge airplane, right? So you see this huge airplane flying through the sky, and you're so impressed by just like how gorgeous it is to see a huge airplane. I mean, these things are just, they're amazing. No matter how many times I fly, it's like amazing just to see these things in the air. But when they're taxiing down the runway, they're kind of clunky, right? It's kind of clunky. It's when it takes off that something magnificent happens, because that's where it belongs. It's like a race car. If you have a race car and you're just driving around a, you know, like a great race car and it's driving around a neighborhood, it like doesn't belong there. It's meant to be out. It's meant to be going fast. And Americans are meant to do great things. And we're not asked to do any great things anymore, because great things would be things we would do together. And so everybody's, the traditional political thing is, well, what do you want? Let me see if I can give you what you want. America isn't just about what you want. It's something so much more important than that. It's what's good for your kids. It's what's good for democracy itself. What's good for the space that we need to hold in the world. And what's going to be good for your grandchildren. What's going to be good for the earth. It's not just about you. And that's how they got us, by making us forget that. So we can change it. But not if we continue to go along. Not if we continue to acquiesce. Not if we continue to say, well, I guess I better. Well, I guess it's the best we could do. Well, I guess. Especially if you're in a party that says, look, just do what we tell you to do. We know what we're doing. Really? Now, it just so happens, and I've seen this, I saw this when I ran before, and I see it this time. There's something so moving to me about the voters in the primary states, because you know how important you are. I mean, people in the primary states, in an early primary state, voters listen differently than they do in New York, let's say. In New York, they're listening thinking, if I agree with this, I might write you a check. And you need a check no matter where you are, but in an early primary state, you're listening to see, well, I vote for you. Knowing, and in my case, given the tremendous, obviously, the tremendous overpowering influence of the president in this particular election, you're not voting, you know, is Marianne going to win Nevada? But you're voting, is Marianne going to stay in the race to be able to make it to the next state? Are we going to keep this conversation? Because we have an economic system today that is predicated on a permanent underclass. If our campaign does not exist, no one needs to discuss it. If this campaign does not exist, no one needs to discuss that 1 in 4 Americans who live with medical debt. Nobody needs to discuss Medicare for all. It's out of the conversation. We got rid of that. We don't have to discuss that. We don't have to discuss tuition-free college and tech school. We don't have to discuss paid family leave. We don't have to discuss the fact that a majority of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. We don't have to discuss whether the fact that the majority of Americans could not absorb a $500 unexpected expenditure. We will have no one questioning, no one even questioning. Can someone, excuse me, about these airstrikes? The 85 airstrikes the other day, I just thought maybe we could just talk about it. So you've got a war in Gaza, and then the Houthis in Yemen say that they're going to attack ships in the Red Sea because of the war in Gaza. So you're going to go after the Houthis, so now we're bombing Yemen. Okay, and then you all keep telling us that the last thing we need is to expand the war in the Middle East, because anybody can see that that would not be good. And now you're telling me that 3 soldiers died in a military base that's at the border of Jordan and Iraq. And I'm not supposed to ask, why are these bases there? We're not supposed to even ask that. And I assure you, as someone who lives in Washington, they can't tell you. And they'll say things like, well, they're kind of like, you know, they're there to keep ISIS at bay, but actually our soldiers are just sitting ducks for ISIS. But we're not supposed to really go into that. And they've just been saying to us, well, we don't want a bigger war in the Middle East. But now, because 3 soldiers died at those military bases, and you say anybody who harms an American, we're coming after them, we're going to go to 85 military strikes, and our defense secretary is going to tell us, oh, that's just beginning, on Iran-backed militias. Iran-backed militias, hello, a war with Iran would make a war with Iraq look like a walk in the park. A war with Iran would make a war in Afghanistan look like a walk in the park. And excuse me, I'm going to say something else. You have 3 soldiers who died, and we're going to go on airstrikes? Well, let me tell you something. What about particularly unarmed black men who have died in this country, and I haven't seen you doing much about it at all? What about the fact that there's so much police brutality? I haven't seen you doing much about it at all. How about children who are dying every day in neighborhoods that are domestic war zones, where they're being killed in their beds with stray bullets, and I don't see you doing much about it at all. So don't go telling me we had to do 85 airstrikes on Iran-backed militias because we care so much about 3 Americans. At what point do we say, you know what? I'm not totally buying it. I'm not totally buying it. So what's happening is the system is doing what the system does. They're over here, and we're over here. Now, remember what I said earlier? You're elected representatives. They, shocking, radical notion, work for you, not the other way around. And it's gotten away from us. And I think we ought, to be honest, I think we ourselves, you know, with everything we go through in life, one of those principles that we have to look at ourselves, we did let this happen. We did let this happen. We thought, no, I'm good. I vote every 2 years. I vote every 4 years, so I'm doing my civic duty. Really? You are you? Because corporate lobbyists are in their offices every hour of every day. And they have really good PR consultants. And they know what to tell you, including how to smear people they don't want you to listen to, or to invisibilize, or to erase. And so I'm speaking to you as Nevada voters, and I'm speaking to you as Americans. We've got to get out of our silos. It's become too much about who's this party, who's that party, who's this color, who's that color, who's this sex, who's this sexuality, who's this religion, who's that. I'm not minimizing any of those things because they're important. However, the foundational principle here is out of many, one. Out of many, one. That we are different, and that's our beauty, that's our richness. Many colors, many ethnicities, many nationalities, religions, not religious, sexuality, gender. I mean, that's all great. But the point is that we are united by common fealty to certain underlying principles. And when we are in that place, we realize that this isn't even just about what our rights are. It's about what our responsibility is. We are responsible for the fate of a great nation. Take that in. In the majority of people, of nations in the world, what you think, not only does it not matter, you could be in big trouble for trying to express your thoughts. I'm aware every time I walk into a room like this, I'm aware that there are countries in the world where if I said a fraction of what I'm saying in this talk in criticism of my government, I would be hauled off the stage, I would be taken to jail, and God knows what might happen to me there. We are treating very shallowly some very deep things. We wouldn't do it in our personal lives. And we shouldn't do it as citizens either. We're going to go into a presidential campaign season with one candidate who hasn't said anything at all. The leading one in my party said nothing about what he has planned for the next 4 years. Doesn't even need to feel that he has a responsibility to you. You're supposed to just do it because they say that this is the way we should do it. And then in the other party, well, that's up to you to decide who for the other party. But I will tell you this, I will make this comment about Nevada. The fact you do not have an open primary and the fact that you have 700,000 disenfranchised, unaffiliated voters is not a good thing. You know, like in New Hampshire, for instance, where there are open primaries, a Democrat could vote for Nikki Haley, a Republican could vote for me, you know what I mean? And that's everybody gets to weigh in. So I do support your yes on 3. Because when you have that's the issue of whether or not to have an open primary. And for those of you who do feel on Tuesday that you would like to vote for me, if you are unaffiliated or even from another party, but you would like to vote for me, you can become a Democrat for a day. That is legal. You become a Democrat for a day. And then if you don't want to be a Democrat on Wednesday, you just change it right back. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing illegal or uncool or against the rules with that. But weigh in. Weigh in. If you look at my website, if you hear me today and you go, actually, that's not the way I think America should go, then I honor that. But if you feel, actually, I think it is the way America should go, then I ask you to buck the system and to not acquiesce to the narrative that you have no choice. We need an economic Bill of Rights that does provide those issues like universal health care, tuition-free college, living wage, affordable housing. We also need to learn to wage peace. Donald Rumsfeld, he was the defense secretary under George Bush, said, we have to learn to wage peace. President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt said, we must do more than end war. We need to end the beginnings of all wars. There are 4 factors, and when these factors are present, that could be in a corner of an American city or another corner of the world. When these factors are present, statistically, there will be a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of conflict. And those factors are, number 1, greater economic opportunities for women, greater educational opportunities for children, a reduction of violence against women, and an amelioration of unnecessary human despair. We need to play peace games as well as war games. We need to have a peace academy as well as a military academy. We have to have an army of peace builders as much as we have an army of military personnel. Think outside the box, everybody. The box is saturated with toxins. The only place to be today is outside the box. The fact that something's outside the box is the good news. The idea that only those who drove the car into this ditch should be considered qualified to lead us out of the ditch. The problem is not that we don't have enough political car mechanics. The problem is we're on the wrong road. We have some really good political car mechanics, and they're driving us over the cliff because nobody's thinking, what is wise? Nobody's thinking what is good and true and beautiful. What represents the angels of our better nature. You know, I want to remind you about that line, angels of our better nature. Abraham Lincoln lived before Freud was born. So we today think we're so cool and so sophisticated. The modern world thinks it's so sophisticated. It thinks it's way beyond things like angels and demons. But that's just the words that people used before there were psychological words. That's all. So when he spoke about the angels of our better nature, he was talking about the aspects of character that is the best of who we are. Love and goodness and character and integrity. And then what are those other things? Demonic, right? Hatred, bigotry, racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, Islamophobia, places the mind can go to hate. And there are people in this country who would harness hatred and do harness hatred and racism and anti-Semitism and all of those other malfunctions of the hearts for their own political purposes. Please take a moment to consider the history of your own people, no matter who, no matter where your ancestors came from. There was somewhere in the line of your ancestry where things did not go well for your people because somebody did that. And the only response to that is that we harness love and tolerance and understanding and mercy and forgiveness and justice for political purposes. You know, Martin Luther King, who had gone to India to study Mahatma Gandhi's principles that he articulated of political nonviolence, and then he brought those principles back to the United States for application to the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Martin Luther King said, "The desegregation of the American South is the political externalization of the goal of the civil rights movement. The ultimate goal," he said, "is the establishment of the beloved community." The whole idea of political nonviolence is that we have to work on the outside and the inside. We have, Dr. King said, we need to have external changes in our circumstances and internal shifts in our souls. It's time for this generation of Americans to grab the hold of history. Grab hold, grab the wheel. Other generations have done it. We've had tough times before. Other generations rose up because they found that place in them where they said, no, this is America. We don't do this. Hell no, we don't do this. We're going to start over. Thomas Paine said we have it in our power to begin the world over again. We had slavery, and then a generation rose up and said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. That's what the abolitionists were. There was institutional suppression of women, and a generation, particularly of women, rose up and said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And they passed the 19th Amendment. And we had the Gilded Age where all the money was held in the hands of a very few. And we had those who began the labor movement saying, no, this is wrong. We're not going to do that anymore. And they established organized labor. And then we had institutionalized suppression of black people in the American South, segregation, black code laws, and a generation rose up and said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And they desegregated the American South, passed the Voting Rights Act, passed the Civil Rights Act. Ladies and gentlemen, and anyone else, it's our turn now. We don't have to do it the way it's been done. We can have all of those issues that I talked about. We can make an economic U-turn. We do not have an economic system by which policy after policy after policy makes it easier for those who already have money to make more money and harder for everyone else to get by. A woman I had lunch with today put it very well. She said, I don't mind that people have privilege. I just have a problem. There was a black woman too, which was very interesting, the context that she was speaking from. She said, I don't have a problem that some people have privilege. I have a problem with the fact that everybody else is unprivileged. Everybody in America should be privileged. It should be a privilege to live here. And right now, too few people have a shot at the blessings of democracy. And that is what Franklin Roosevelt said is the real antidote to fascism. He said, we will not have to worry about a fascist takeover in this country as long as democracy delivers on its promises. I know that the fascists are at the door, but you know what? They should never have gotten that close. And they wouldn't have gotten that close if we had universal health care and we had tuition-free college and we didn't have so many burdens that are these invisible chains around too many people in this country. Children are born with infinite God-given potential. And it's our job to do everything possible to create a world in which, if they're willing to work for it, whoever they are, they can have it. That is the point. That is the profundity of all this. That all men are created equal. That all men have inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That all men, and that governments are instituted to secure those rights. And if government is not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it. And this is one of those times. I don't say this as a bomb thrower. I don't say this as a chaos agent. I don't say this as someone who doesn't recognize that big change, fundamental economic reform must be carried out wisely and responsibly. Of course it must be, but it must be carried out. Because if fundamental economic reform is not carried out in this country, I fear what is going to happen. There is too much tension. There is too much anxiety and tension rumbling under the surface of things. It is going to blow. It is going to blow in one direction or the other. It's either going to blow in the direction of greater democracy, mercy, justice, social good, a new beginning, regeneration, repair, an initiation of we too can start the world over. We too can reject and repudiate systems of injustice. That's how Abraham Lincoln described the Declaration of Independence. He said it is an eternal rebuke to all systems of tyranny and oppression. But what has happened is that the power, the emotional power of the Declaration of Independence isn't living in our hearts right now. It's our marble walls. It's underneath. It's under glass on parchment. We had to take it in. You know, in the Jewish religion, something very interesting is said in the Jewish religion, which is every generation has to discover God for itself. And every generation has to discover the radicalism of the American experiment for itself. Every generation has to ask ourselves, what does the Declaration of Independence really mean? What does it mean, Jefferson's line, that the only safe repository for power in this country is in the hands of the people? Because power is not in the hands of the people now. Because our elected representatives have basically taken it from us. And the power is in the hands of huge corporate lobbying interests that basically use our elected representatives like puppets. That's not going to change unless we change it. The system will not disrupt itself. We need a Department of Peace. We need a Department of Children and Youth. We need to ramp down, not ramp up, fossil fuel extraction, and I think it is time to end America's war on drugs. Yeah. It is time to make some serious changes. And if you help me by voting for me on Tuesday, if you help me by telling everyone you know, look at her website, look at Marianne2024.com. This woman should stay in the race, and I will not be able to stay in the race if I do not get a number in Nevada that makes it reasonable. And I know so many of the obstructions, it doesn't matter. I'm responsible for my own experience, and I'm a big girl. But I think that the conversation that we are having here today is significant. We shouldn't be having shallow conversations. We should be having deep conversations. And what my 40-year career in personal growth and transformation and everything that we're all about in places like this has shown me is that Americans are decent as anyone else, not better than other people, but as decent as everyone else. And we're as capable of going deep. We are capable of going deep. I have been with people in this community of higher transformation and consciousness in this country for decades. I have been up close and personal with people who had just been told the test came back, the news is not good, it's cancer. Your child is addicted to crystal meth. Your beloved husband was just killed suddenly. The worst things that can happen to people, I understand. I've been up close and personal, and I know the capacity we have to move through crisis, to endure it, and to transform it. And now we're living at a time in our country where it's time to recognize the crisis, to find it in ourselves, to endure it, and to transform it. When my career began, times of crisis in the people that I met were times that were exceptions and not the rule. In America, it seemed a crisis was the exception and not the rule. But that's no longer true today. I meet too many people for whom the crisis is the rule and not the exception. And for too many of those people, the crisis is caused by bad public policy. The crisis is that they don't have health care and they can't afford the operation. The crisis is that they can't make it on just one job. The crisis is they're actually skipping meals to feed their children. And I have the same feeling in my heart that I've had with working with any individual. Oh, we got to change that. With our God-given potential to rise up, to awaken, to show up for the moment, we can endure this and we can transform it. And when it comes to our collective experience, other American generations have done it before. Let's not be the first generation of Americans to wimp out on the job it takes to course correct this nation when we have swerved from the angels of our better nature. We are not doing what Abraham Lincoln claimed on the battlefield at Gettysburg when he said that the men there had died so that government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish from the earth. It's perishing now. It's perishing on our watch. It is a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. Those corporations and the people who adhere to that need to hear from us. And there's, at this point, in this particular week, a particular group of people who more than anyone else has the power to let them hear you. Nevada, take it from here. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.